Hello and welcome, fellow motorsports fans. The first few winter series of the year have finished last weekend, and as I promised, this is the perfect opportunity to make a little review about them. Today we begin with the F4 UAE Championship with a new, probably soon to be legendary champion in Freddie Slater, and lots of other smaller storylines playing out over a fantastic 5-round series. Now, with this, I mainly want to focus on maybe the smaller teams and drivers that didn't quite get my attention during the weekly reviews, but obviously everybody will get their moment in this video. With two little exceptions, I will totally ignore the trophy round as it featured an entirely different driver roster, and I will also ignore the XGP team as they only did a one-off round. With this out of the way, let's begin with the worst team in the championship in our lowest tier. In our shit tier, as I unfortunately had to label it, we only have a single entry with Pinnacle Motorsports, who unfortunately, what can I really say? It is a subpar car with two subpar drivers, so there really were no expectations and they performed as expected, so not at all. Doriane Pin, I only know as a driver who clearly has the budget to drive lots and lots of different things around the world, but unfortunately doesn't quite have the ability to actually score in any of these various series he's participating in. And Fu, I didn't know anything about at all, so yeah, fair enough, he about did as expected, I suppose. There was also Yamakoshi, but he only did a one-off round for the squad, so I don't really want to judge him based on that. That would be a little unfair. So let's not waste any time and let's move on to the real teams now. The first team in the category I dubbed One Hit Wonder is Saintéloc Racing, and interestingly they aren't really that much of a one hit wonder in this series, but I still put them in there because first of all they were at the bottom of the table and they were still largely carried by Matteo Quintarelli, which that in and of itself was very odd and surprising in my opinion. He had a really good, or at least solid season, especially around the Yas Marina track. Now maybe this is the home advantage playing in his favour. I'm sure he's done lots and lots of laps around this very circuit, but yeah, that was still a pleasant surprise to see him in the points this often. They also had the entire opposite of this though, with Maximiliano Restrepo, I believe he's pronounced. Don't quote me on this, please. But yeah, he was full on backmarking the entire season, unfortunately. In a similar fashion, they had Aurélien Nobels for some of the rounds. She was also nowhere to be found as expected, really. And also, sadly, Rafael Narak fell in a similar category. Now, Narak, I have to say, I also thought he was a little underrated in the Italian F4 last year, if I may say so. I always thought maybe it's the car holding him back a little or whatever, but no, I think this proved he's just probably not that great a driver. Fair enough, I was wrong there. Last but not least, they had even David in the team, he is actually a really interesting rookie, and he performed reasonably well, although it was also very frustrating to watch him over the entire season because time and time again he somehow managed to not score. I think he actually finished the season with 0 points somehow. Trust me, this does not reflect his ability at all. He was competing for points quite a bit in the latter stages of the season, but yeah, he was never quite able to get it over the line or got involved into some incidents or whatever. So yeah, quite a frustrating driver to watch over this season. But it was his debut and I'm sure he'll get it together. The pace is clearly there. They also had Jules Carrento for a single round, but we'll get to him when we talk about Race GP. The other team in this very tier is AGI Sport, the Australian outfit, and they were a mixed bag, and this is really the perfect label for One Hit Wonder because on the one hand they had Jack Beaton, who was really competent and often at the sharp end of the grid, fighting for reverse grid wins or at the very least fighting for points, sometimes for podiums. Like, yeah, he was a really like upper midfield driver at worst basically. So yeah, really nice to see all around. And then they had a lineup of drivers that were just a bit of a waste, if you ask me. So Carrie Schreiner, we know her. She's too old to be driving in F4 cars anyway. I know this is preparation for F1 Academy, but then again, she's too old to be driving F1 Academy. So I don't know what the point is, but she didn't do anything, and it's really just frustrating to watch her. She should probably stick to the Nordschleife at this point, but whatever. Then there was Nicholas Stati, however you pronounce Australian names. He had some tiny glimpses here and there with half decent runs in the midfield, but then again, yeah, nothing really worth talking about, but he is a true rookie, so that's fair. And in a similar fashion, we had Peter Buzinelios. We had Peter, he's also a racing driver, and similar. Frustrating, not really there, but I think he's also like a true rookie, so fair enough, we'll give him time. This team was very much Jack Beaton and a few also-rans deep down the midfield. So yeah, on the flip side, these were the only two teams with only one or two competent drivers. All the others featured a just stacked roster all around. So let's get to it. This tier I just named top teams because, quite frankly, there really isn't a great way to differentiate between those, with one notable exception, which you can probably guess. The lowest of those, somewhat surprisingly to me, is Race GP, which later had Enzo Dellini join them as a perfect sort of benchmark driver to allow us to assess the car's performance. And he quite clearly showed that, at least in theory, the car has front-running potential. It can very much fight with the Premas for podiums and wins and all that good stuff, at the very least in the hands of an experienced driver. Outside of Dellini in the later stages, Race GP was mostly actually focused on promoting rookies and giving them a chance in the car, which was very nice to see, and they also had by far the most interesting rookies outside of the very obvious and stacked Prema squad, which we'll get to in a moment. My rookies outside of Prema, once again, my rookies of this championship were Jules Caranta and Enzo Ye, and in particular Jules Caranta. Now, he actually finished below Ye in the final standings, but in my opinion he was both more impressive overall, and he also had a, how should we say this, a more consistent or more believable like curve of learning curve. Yeah, I think that's the best way of putting it. So with Caranta, you could really watch him. First of all, he already started pretty strong. He started scrapping just outside of the points most of the time, and then he was like gradually improving to fighting in the points more and more consistently, to the point where at the end he was actually fighting for reverse grid podiums and that sort of stuff. So a really just believable learning curve, which I think if he can continue this trend a little bit longer, he might be fighting at the sharp end of his chosen F4 championship. So that's a great sight. Enzo Ye, similar, but I don't know why, at least just very subjectively, I felt like Caranta was the quicker of the two more often, and I think he might have just had like one more unfortunate retirement than Ye to actually make him finish below. I haven't checked this, but that's my gut feeling anyways, that Caranta was the better of the two. Now, they can't all be great, obviously. They also had Luca Samalisto as a rookie, who, again, he at the very least, I have to say, on the positive side, he did improve considerably over the season as well. Unfortunately, it took him a lot longer than his two rookie teammates, and it also never quite reached the same heights. So Samalisto, clearly, yes, there's some talent there, some potential there, but considering the opposition he had and everything, unfortunately, he was just a bit of an also-ran in this particular squad. Second in this tier is PHM, and they were solely carried by Nikita Bedrin, who, if you followed FIDE series at all in the last year or so, there's no way he should be racing in an F4 level series. He was more or less just smurfing on guys. And so, yeah, he performed about as expected. He also showed the very obvious shortcomings of the car, if I might say so. They were not as good as they were in the Formula Region Middle East, for example, nowhere close really. But in the hands of an experienced driver like Bedrin, they could still fight for the occasional podium and reverse grid wins and all that good stuff. Bedrin was obviously scheduled to leave early for F3 testing, and it felt like he was mostly there to do the team a favour anyway, so his seat then got taken by Davide Larini, and Davide Larini did absolutely nothing at all with the seat, just a huge waste really, but then again so were a lot of these PHM seats. Next in the list, and this one was really annoying over the course of the season, Everett Stack. And no hate on the guy, I don't know him outside of this at all. I've never heard, I think he was actually doing F4 USA towards the end of last year. Anyway, I'd never noticed him there, but in this he was really the most frustrating driver to watch. I don't want to say the worst one hands down or anything, but at the very least the combination of terrible pace, bad final position, And the amount of incidents he was involved in particular safety car causing incidents, was just not great to watch. He was really mainly there as a roadblock and to bring out the yellow flag every now and then, it felt like. Obviously this might sound very exaggerated, but just from a viewer perspective, yeah, that was the only point of him being there. Now, they had some upside as well. First of all, they had Kamal Emrat, I hope that's how you pronounce it, and Maximilian Popov. Both of them rookies, both of them pretty good, actually. Yeah, you know what? Considering the car difference, they were probably on a very, very similar level to the race GP boys. Maybe not quite Caranta and Ye, but at the very least at the Samalista level, probably actually better. At least Popov definitely showed some potential. Now again, frustrating as well. He, you know, it felt like, oh yeah, he's improving. He'll score now. He'll definitely score lots of, oh no, Andy's gone again. Okay, so inconsistent, definitely, but at least both him and Emirates clearly showed potential, and I'll be, you know, keeping an eye on him going forward. Next team in the category, Hitech, and talking about frustrating, this team really was just the definition of frustrating. You see, this is a pattern here. It happens in F4 series. Some of these drivers are young and inconsistent, and it can be a bit annoying to watch when you're rooting for them. I think probably most of you watching know this feeling quite well. In this one, Mr. Frustrating himself, Dean Fairclough, who is coming into British F4 next year as a title favourite, at least for my money. The problem is, he should have been at the sharp end of this championship. He started like, oh yeah, he might actually give this title fight a go, you know, in the first round. He looked on point, obviously in a Hitech against the Prema, tiny bit of an uphill battle, but still, it looked like he might have a shot. And then the middle portion of his series, like sort of from round 2 to 4, more or less, he was just accident after accident after accident. I don't know how many front wings the guy lost over this season, but they can probably start selling him somewhere. So I don't know. Really, it wasn't that great. He needs to keep his nose clean in the British F4 if he wants to win this title. The pace is there. That's not the problem at all. In a similar, but fortunately nowhere near as frustrating fashion, we had Gabriel Stilp, who he impressed on a few occasions. He definitely has the pace as well. It's going to be him against Fairclough probably. Once again, not the most consistent driver ever. I don't even quite know how he finished below Fairclough in the standings. That's how you can see when Fairclough was on it, he really was, and then his bad days were incredibly bad, and with Stilp it sort of at least felt the average was the lows weren't as low, maybe, if that makes sense. But he finished below in the championship. I don't know who I'd put as the quicker driver overall. They are somewhat similar in my opinion, but whatever. Then, the rookies. Ariza Suburofen. I don't know if you had heard of this guy before this season. I've watched him last year in the Ginetta Juniors, and he is already there. He was a tiny bit of a frustrating driver. So this is, again, it's a pattern, like I said. In the Ginettas, he had the pace to, not quite to win, because there was Freddie Slater, and that was a bit of a tough one for everybody, but he had consistent podium pace, but not consistently the ability to actually stay at the front of the field without, you know, getting into an incident or something. So I am really glad to see his pace has translated reasonably well to the F4 car, I'd say. He had a few good runs. He had a few runs fighting for points, especially in the latter stages. So there's clearly some potential there. Again, I'm not even going to mention, yes, he was frustrating as well in this one, as was Hitech as a package. I actually want to point out Hitech as a team was just looking a little inconsistent as well. Last but not least, they had Sebastian Murray, and I actually have to say, I didn't notice him all that much. I don't know why, so this can be both good or bad. He was just largely anonymous to me. I think like his pace was definitely okay. I didn't notice him as, oh, he was miles off his teammate every time. I would have noticed that, right? He was just decent, but nothing special, nothing I'm particularly excited about either, if that makes sense. And I think that's fair. You have to have some of these guys to sort of make up the numbers, but clearly no one where you have to be worried about him in a team next year or anything. He was good, or at the very least, all right, I shall say. Next up, we had the main challenger, and this was a huge surprise really, and we have Xcel and Yasheed Academy. I've thrown them together and it's really bizarre. Now, the Yasheed Academy cars were apparently run by Xcel Motorsports, but they scored about I'm bad at maths, but let's say like 40 times the points or something, despite having only 2 drivers against like 6-ish. So really weird. Essentially, Yas Heat Academy had the only 2 competent drivers of the squad, or really competent drivers of the squad, and then Xcel had all the others. With this out of the way, the first one here is obviously clearly Keanu Al-Azari. He was in the championship fight until the very end. In my opinion, he actually looked like the best driver over the entire season. I think the team kind of let him down in the end, if you ask me. Obviously, this is very subjective, but he clearly deserves to have that top 3 finish that he got at the end. And yeah, just a true all-around championship contender. Now, very interesting then, Zach Scular, who I also really didn't have on my notes at all before this. He also had a very impressive, especially start to the season. Didn't expect him to be at the sharp end at all, obviously. I didn't really know him that much. But yeah, he was consistently fighting for points. Clearly not Al-Azari's level, but also just a solid racing driver. Could be the home track advantage for both of them, obviously. This plays a huge role. I'd imagine if you're in a team or part of a program called Yas Heat Academy and you're racing around Yas Marina, there is a reason to suggest that maybe they've done more laps around there than their average opposition, but nonetheless you can't take away the performance they showed. Now, let's get to the more, and there it is again, my word of the day, frustrating drivers of the lineup. Thiago Rodriguez, the Chinese F4 champion, and I've been like low-key excited. He's done alright, you know, when he's competed outside of China. He's been okay. He's had some glimpses in the F4 Southeast Asia. He's had a decent weekend at Macau. You know, there's clearly something there. But once again, in this series, well, it just never quite clicked. It felt like he was always just like, the one thing was missing every time, either just a tiny bit of pace, and then when he was in the points, it was a tiny bit of racecraft or a tiny bit of luck, you know, always just one piece of the puzzle missing for him to actually bring home results. I don't know his program for next season. I really hope he goes to Europe and does a full season somewhere, because it feels like he would really need that growth. There is definitely some talent there, in my opinion. Like, the guy can drive cars and he can do so quickly, but for whatever reason, not quite on this level just yet. Now, the rest of the team, not as exciting. Rodriguez, my favorite to at least keep an eye on, in my opinion. Rodella was part of the team. He actually started all right. I don't know what happened there. He just seemed to drop off a cliff. It really, I don't know, probably he got outdeveloped by the rookies, it sort of looked like to me, but it's very hard to tell from the outside. Now, from the Chinese roster, there was a Kaishun, yeah, whatever, Chinese name. I'm probably not politically correct anymore, but here we are. And he's not even Chinese, if I remember correctly. He's from Hong Kong, I think. Yeah, I'm sure that's entirely fine. Either way, unfortunately, not really an interesting driver, one of those backmarker times. Given the car he's in, if you're scrapping at around P20 every race and you sit in what's, by all accounts, probably the second best car on the grid, yeah, that's just not great to watch, unfortunately. In a similar fashion, and this was one I was personally a little disappointed with, Tina Hausmann, a Prema driver in F1 Academy, upcoming season, and probably you can't call her a favorite with Doriane Pin in the picture, but she's like one of my favorites for top 3, let's put it that way, in the championship. And yeah, I thought she was underrated last year as well in the Italian F4. Obviously, she was driving a terrible car. But yeah, so I had hoped maybe she can show some things here. Who knows, maybe even get close to her first point. Obviously, she didn't do the entire season, but let's just say she didn't get close to that first point. Not at all, really. She was straight up backmarking for the rounds she did. So yeah, I thought I was a tiny bit sad. Last but not least in the team, and again, a name that I'm unfortunately going to butcher, Mercedes Junior Janpu Choi. Yeah. He actually pleasantly surprised me, I have to say. I was on the record saying I don't really know why he's a Merc Junior. I thought, well, money. As always in racing, if you don't know why something's happening, the answer is probably money. But he actually showed talent here, the very thing he'd never quite managed to do last year in karting, I thought. He was always just, you know, he did get beaten very convincingly by his teammates. But yeah, here he was good. And by all accounts, he looked like, at the very least, an equal to Rodriguez while having less experience in the cars. So I thought that was very, very nice to see. And now, without further ado, to the team you've all been waiting for. The only fitting name for this final category, in my opinion, really is just calling it by its actual name, which is Prema. They were in fact running two different teams, with the Mumbai Falcons as a name branding exercise and Prema itself, and interestingly they still managed to occupy both P1 and P2 in the championship with their different teams, but obviously there's no real point differentiating between them anyway, since they were essentially driving the same car. No better point to begin than with the sensation himself, Freddie Slater, the reigning champion. It was a championship predominantly won on consistency, really, if you ask me. He didn't actually win all that many races. In fact, Nakamura-Berta won more than him. But yeah, he just kept scoring race after race after race. It took him quite a while to even drop below the top 5 or top 4, if I remember correctly. Even if it hadn't been for that sort of sketchy 4th round, which both he and admittedly also Keanu Al-Azari had, he would have probably locked up the title a fair bit easier. So, in my opinion, by all accounts, yes, he is a very, very deserved champion. Obviously, I've been on the record saying that he is also my, well, I don't want to say my favourite, he is, in my opinion, the best karting graduate of the year. So, yeah, it goes without saying, I did sort of expect this. But I also want to make clear that actually he didn't look like the quickest guy all around, at least on raw pace. I think that was Kean Nakamura-Berta, KNB as we can call him, fortunately. Otherwise, nobody's got the time for his full name. He, at the very least, at the end of the season, looked like the quicker of the two. He was on pole more often, he was fighting for wins more often, he scored more wins in the end of the day. So, actually, going into Italian F4, maybe you could argue he is the favourite, at least, of the experienced Prema boys. Just food for thought. Now, I will stay with my original prediction and back Freddie Slater all the way for everything he's doing this year, but definitely Nakamura-Berta looks very, very hot. Now, especially in contrast to his karting rival, Alex Powell, who I had in my top 3 karting graduates of the year, but so far it doesn't really look like that'll manifest itself anytime soon, unfortunately. He's been decent. I was actually somewhat surprised to find him in the top 4 of the championship. It didn't quite feel like that, to be honest. But yeah, he didn't quite have what it takes. He didn't quite have the pace to compete with his front-running Prema teammates, and he very much looked like one of the secondary tier Prema guys, if you can make that sort of differentiation. Now, that's not a bad thing by any means. We'll get to some more names in our category in just a second, and you'll see, yeah, that's still very good, but not quite. And unfortunately, he also got comprehensively beaten by Rashid Al-Daheri as well, who is the sort of 3rd best of the Prema boys. Again, similar to Al-Azari, probably some sort of home advantage. I'd imagine he's probably done more laps around these tracks, but first of all, that's largely speculation. And second of all, again, you can't really take the performance away from him. If anything, it's just, yeah, he's not a rookie anymore. He's got a year on all of his teammates. That is worth quite a lot. I don't think Al-Daheri will all of a sudden pop up as a championship favourite anywhere, really. Yeah, that's just not in the cards, I'm afraid. Now, to talk more about Powell's direct opposition in the team, there's 2 notable ones. First of all, female sensation Doriane Pin. Obviously, we've talked about her a lot over the season. We will continue to talk about her a lot over the coming year, I'm sure, as she'll go on to dominate F1 Academy, no doubt about it, while doing stuff in WEC and all over the world. But yeah, so if Alex Powell, in my opinion, still did a better overall job than Doriane Pin, I think that says a fair bit about his potential, given that was his first year in car racing, period. Or not even his, well, this is his first year in car racing, that's how I should phrase it rather. Nonetheless, there's another guy in this very category, and he is, we're back with the term, he's the most frustrating Prema driver of the season, no doubt. It's Dion Gauda, who, by all accounts, he had pace to fight with the front guys, at the very least to fight with Powell. He was on that sort of level, but man alive, he was farming DNFs and front wing damage and incidents and everything in the first couple of rounds. It was so annoying to watch. He eventually got it together. He got a couple of podiums and everything. I think he got his maiden win. Don't quote me on this. You'll see it on your screen anyway as I'm doing this. But yeah, this could have been a lot better. The kid clearly has pace. I am looking forward to see if he can get it together. My prediction would be he can throw himself into the championship fight in Italian F4 next year. But yeah, I mean, not like this, let's put it that way. That was more of a Wharton-esque performance where you can see the pace, but I mean, the car needs to cross the finish line in one piece, ideally. Now, Prema also had one last driver, because Doriane Pin obviously had to leave a little bit early, and that is Thomas Stoltemanis, also in my list of top karting graduates of the year. Says a lot about the Prema roster. They feature 4 of my top 5 karting graduates of the year. But yeah, Stoltemanis he didn't really get a chance to show. Let's make this nice and short. He didn't really have time to show much. He only did 2 rounds. He got a reverse grid P2. That's really nice. He was okay, not outstanding, because how could he be? But I think he did just about what you'd expect from a guy joining late in a championship. Now, that was around 40-ish drivers we've just covered. Let me know the most interesting one for you personally, and crucially, make it more interesting than Slater or K&B. Give me someone of the lesser known drivers that you were really enjoying throughout this season, someone who you thought did, you know, performed above your expectations. I'd be really interested to know. And otherwise, I'll thank you all for watching. I'd kindly ask you to leave a like if you enjoyed this video. And you can also subscribe if you want to see the Formula Regional Middle Eastern edition in a few days or maybe a week. I don't really know when I'll be able to get it out, but it'll come, I'll promise. And otherwise, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.